Devil May Cry 4 is, quite obviously, the fourth release of the Devil May Cry series. Devil May Cry 4, much like its predecessors, is an action game with a deep and complex battle system. However, this is also quite the controversial game in the series, although not as much as the second game. Still, I hope to look at this game as objectively as I can. Graphically, this game, despite being a fairly early generation game, still holds really well in terms of visuals. The character models and environments still look pretty good as well as the animations, which come off fluid and smooth. There are some areas where the shadowing looks a bit off, but that's few and far between, and it's not that bad. Otherwise, graphically, this game really isn't much to complain about. Now, the music in this game is something that people might be divided on. The soundtrack sports a lot of heavy metal tracks, which can cool or push away gamers. Personally, I really like this kind of music, since it's my kind of music, but I can understand that it would be a bother to others. The game has some symphonic tracks here and there, which I feel work well with some of the more emotional moments of the game, and also spice up the variety of the music with something different. The voice acting in this game, however, is top-notch. Ruben Langdon reprises his role as Dante from Devil May Cry 3, and we now have Johnny Young Bosch lend his voice to the new protagonist Nero, to which he does the hot-blooded hero voice to a T. Alright, let me get this out of the way first. Devil May Cry has never been about the story. The story is not particularly bad in this series, but it's pretty low on the totem pole of reasons why to play it. The plots in these games usually amount to something bad happens, so Dante has to stop it. Now, what the series does well is its characters. They're not particularly deep or anything, but they tend to be either interesting or, in Dante's case, just a ton of fun. In particular, the really over-top cutscenes in this game are really fun to watch, since the characters are just so overpowered. They tend to perform some really over-the-top stuff. In this game specifically, we follow primarily the aforementioned Nero. Nero is a new character in the series, and serves to allow newcomers to the series to easily jump in without previously playing the other games in the series. The story starts off with Dante appearing out of nowhere and killing the Pope who was giving a sermon. Nero then takes action against Dante. Afterwards, demons start taking over the island, and it's up to Nero to stop them and figure out what's going on. With the exception of introducing Nero, who seems to be connected to Dante's brother Virgil from the previous games, the story in this game is pretty much filler. Which makes sense since this game is meant to open itself up to newcomers, but this is a negative for veterans who wanted to learn more about the history of Dante and his father. Now, let's talk about the most important aspect of any Devil May Cry game, combat. If you've played the other games in the series, you should feel right at home, despite the fact that you're playing as Nero for the first half of the game. The game lets you play as Nero for the first 10 missions, Dante for the next 8, and then Nero again for the last 2. The game does a very good job of making you feel like you're playing as two completely different characters. Both of them have their own weapons and abilities that only they can use, save for a very few. Nero has 3 main forms of attack: his gun, his sword, and his Devil Bringer. His gun, the Blue Rose, is a giant 2-barrel magnum, and his main form of long-range attack. With the use of Proud Souls, which I will get into later, you can also do a charge shot for more damage. His sword, the Red Queen, is a pretty unique weapon as well. Attached to the handle of the sword is a trigger, which allows Nero to literally ignite his sword on fire. This also increases the power of Nero's attacks, and adds a new and interesting dynamic in battle. The Devil Bringer is also pretty unique as well. It allows Nero to do quite a few things. First off, it allows you to do the Snatch ability, which allows him to drag enemies towards him so he can deal more damage. This also lets Nero use his Buster move, which is among the most useful of his abilities, especially against bosses who have been stunned. Using the Buster at this moment will deal major damage. The Devil Bringer is also used throughout the game to solve some minor puzzles here and there, and to perform a little bit of platforming. Nero, much like Dante, also utilizes a Devil Trigger. However, his is a bit different. Whenever you press the button to shoot his gun, even if he's swinging the sword or doing a Buster attack, flying swords will pierce the enemy. When Nero swings his sword around, the apparition floating above him will also swing his sword. So what's normally a 4-hit combo will actually turn into an 8-hit combo instead. Finally, whenever you use a Buster attack on an enemy, the animation is usually a lot longer and does a lot more damage. Combining with the fact that you can shoot the flying swords as this is happening allows you to deal tons of damage. Dante also uses his trademark Devil Trigger in this game, and it works very similarly to how it has been in previous games, mainly making him stronger, faster, and allowing him to slowly regenerate his health. Some attacks are also either stronger or have a longer combo animation. Now, unfortunately, unlike Dante, Nero does not gain any new weapons. However, for what he does have, he learns a lot of moves, so he doesn't really feel like he needs more weapons. As for Dante, he plays similarly to how he did in Devil May Cry 3, but with some tweaks. Since Dante only gets 3 close and long range weapons respectively, instead of having to choose which weapons he has to bring in before battle like in the previous game, he has all of them all at once, and you can just switch between them whenever you want to, with either the R2 and L2 shoulder buttons or the trigger buttons. The style system from Devil May Cry 3 also makes a return. However, instead of choosing only one style before going onto a mission, this game allows you to pick between all 4 styles on the fly with the use of the D-pad. This is pretty awesome, as it opens up Dante's combo possibilities immensely. Another big difference, however, is the style system of DMC3 and DMC4 is that you do not gain experience points from killing enemies to level them up. Instead, you purchase each style level up, which opens up more abilities for that specific style, by the way, by use of Proud Souls. Now, I've mentioned these before, but before I actually get into them, I must explain what red orbs do in this game. Typically, red orbs were used in the other games to purchase items and learn new moves. However, in this game, red orbs are now exclusively only used for items, and instead we now get the Proud Souls to learn new abilities. You earn Proud Souls similar to how you earned red orbs in previous games, simply being a skillful, and of course, stylish player. I liked this separation between red orbs and Proud Souls to be used only for items and skills respectively, because it allows the characters to learn many more skills than usual. The amount of moves that you learn because of this system is a pretty long list compared to the older games. What's also good is when you purchase a skill, it makes all the other skills more expensive. This forces you to consider what would be the most important to purchase first, as opposed to just buying skills at random. The boss fights in this game are also pretty fun. They're not nearly as memorable as the other games in the series, save for Kratos and Burial. Those fights were pretty epic. Unfortunately, the final boss in this game I felt was really lacking, and it wasn't that fun to fight. However, Devil May Cry 4 is not all sunshine and roses, even in its strongest area. One of the biggest issues with this game is the fact that playing the game as Dante means you have to go through the exact same levels and fight the exact same bosses as you did with Nero. There are very few enemies and bosses that only Nero and Dante fight respectively. However, this does not excuse the laziness of going through the game essentially twice just in reverse order. Another issue is the camera, which is actually a recurring issue for the series. While it's not a persistent issue throughout the game, in tight corridors, the camera can make it really hard to see where the enemy is. Luckily, most of the areas you fight enemies in are actually quite spacious, so this isn't too much of an issue, but should be mentioned regardless. I also felt that this game was a lot more forgiving than the previous games, save for Devil May Cry 2. For example, using an item, say for the gold orb, will not penalize you in the mission clear screen. This game generally felt it was a lot easier as well, and trying to appeal to newcomers as opposed to longtime fans. There were some real controller chucking moments in this series, but I never really felt that in this game until I got to the really hard difficulties. Despite its faults, however, I think Devil May Cry 4 is a pretty decent game. It's pretty affordable on both consoles and is accessible to newcomers. If I had to rank Devil May Cry 4 among the rest of the series, I'd definitely say that Devil May Cry 3 and 1 are at the very top, and 4 is a notch or two below, but is still leagues better than Devil May Cry 2. A bit disappointing in some aspects for longtime fans of the series, but regardless, Devil May Cry 4 is an enjoyable game and worth a purchase. This has been Shinji, everyone. Take it easy.